Commissioner Gordon. Bane has escaped.
You don't need a perfect origin story. You need a decision. One hard, final, violent decision that who you've been no longer defines who you can become. Time bends for the man who no longer begs it for permission. It expands for the man who treats every minute like a weapon. Most people let time pass through them like water. But the rare few, they grip time by the throat and force it to serve their mission. They know it's not about when you start, it's about how. With what urgency, with what violence of focus. Because regret ages fast. But action makes even the oldest man feel immortal. The world is filled with late bloomers who refuse to die quietly. Colonel Sanders didn't build KFC until he was in his 60s. Raymond Chandler didn't write his first detective novel until he was 51. Morgan Freeman wasn't a household name until after 50. These men weren't late. They were ready. And that readiness wasn't about external validation. It was about internal combustion. The refusal to live one more day as a diluted version of themselves. They didn't need youth. They needed ignition. You don't need time. You need intensity. If you wake up another day, you haven't missed your chance. You've been given one more bullet, one more swing, one more hour to prove that the man you were yesterday does not hold jurisdiction over today. But most people waste that bullet arguing with the past, playing the highlight reel of failures, recounting betrayal, missed chances, lost time. And while they drown in memory, time slips out the side door. Opportunity doesn't wait for grief to finish. It waits for action to begin. The past has already stolen enough. Don't give it your future, too. There's no expiration date on transformation. Evolution doesn't check your birth certificate. Growth doesn't ask for permission from your wounds. The door doesn't close until you stop walking toward it. Even then, the door waits. It mocks you with possibility. Every book unwritten, every story untold, every strength undeveloped, all sitting behind the wall you built yourself. You don't need to climb it. You need to shatter it. And you don't do that by asking if it's too late. You do it by acting like it never was. The fear you feel, that tightness in your chest, that's not failure. That's restraint. It's your potential throwing a tantrum. It's the fire inside you gasping for oxygen. The shame you carry isn't from falling short. It's from never letting yourself rise. You weren't born to be domesticated. You weren't built to exist as a shadow. You are not furniture for someone else's life. You are the architect of your own resurrection. And you don't need youth for that. You need hunger. Watch a man in his 40s rebuild his body and you'll see the fire that no 20-year-old can fake. Watch a woman in her 50s start her first business and you'll witness a kind of clarity that's immune to criticism. They've seen time slip by. They've lived with the regret. And now, every step is nuclear. Every hour is surgical. Because when you finally realize it's never too late, you stop walking like you've got time to waste. You move like you're on borrowed breath. Because you are. Stop measuring your progress against timelines that were never written for you. The only timeline that matters is the one you choose to build now. Most people hand their clock to the world, to family, to culture, to fear. But the moment you reclaim it, the moment you say, "This second is mine," everything changes. Time doesn't run from you. It starts working for you. And every late start becomes legendary when backed by consistency. You want to know what separates those who bloom late from those who never bloom? It's not luck. It's not intelligence. It's defiance, the refusal to bow to time, the rejection of the narrative that says, it's too late. They flip that script, they weaponize that doubt, and they build with the kind of ferocity only found in the unreasonably committed. They are not driven by youth. They are driven by truth. That who they could become matters more than who they were told they are. Anything worth doing with your life will demand years of your life. Not days, not months, years. This is the part they don't tell you. Not because they want to mislead you, but because most people don't want to hear it. It doesn't fit into a viral soundbite. It doesn't sell overnight results. But it's the eternal law of mastery. 1 full year of deliberate, consistent effort, 3 times a week minimum, just to become decent. That's 12 months of repetition, of tinkering in the dark, of pushing through doubt, while seeing barely any progress. And even after that, you are a beginner with a foundation. 5 years, you begin to feel competent. You start to speak with experience instead of theory. 10 years, you don't just speak, you shift rooms. Because greatness doesn't whisper, it echoes. And yet people quit after 10 weeks. After 3 setbacks, after 1 bad month. They walk away because they expect mastery to arrive on their schedule. But skill laughs at entitlement. The world doesn't reward your wants. It rewards your repetitions, your ability to show up long after your mood has left the room. That's the price. That's the transaction. 10 years to move from echoing others to becoming the voice they echo. And that decade will break most. Not because it's impossible, but because it's invisible for too long. You do the work in silence, you improve in shadows. And then one day the world notices, but only because you never stopped when it didn't. The mind built for mastery sees time differently. It doesn't ask, how long will it take? It asks, how deeply can I immerse? Because immersion is the lever. 10 years sounds like a prison to the scattered, but to the committed it's a playground. It's the raw space where depth is forged, where shortcuts are burned, where you move from merely doing the task to becoming it. Writing isn't typing anymore, it's breathing. Coaching isn't advice, it's instinct. Leading isn't performance, it's presence. That's the evolution time allows if you're bold enough to stay. There are those who will scoff at 10-year visions. They'll mock the pace. They'll measure you against quicker wins. Let them. Most people aren't patient, they're addicted to novelty. They chase new skills every season, stacking shallow knowledge until their mind becomes cluttered but not sharp. But the man who plants himself in a craft, who absorbs every detail, who learns the physics behind the punch, psychology behind the silence, he becomes a weapon. Not because of speed, but because of consistency. The world bends to those who do the same thing so well for so long that they eventually redefine it. This is why it's never too late. Because 10 years is 10 years, whether you start at 20 or 50. The man who begins today at 50 will still be 60 when that time has passed. But now he'll be 10 years deep in mastery, not 10 years deeper in regret. The man who delays until it's convenient never finds the door, because the door doesn't appear. You carve it with each hour you refuse to skip, every time you say no to distraction, every time you return after failure. That's how the door forms. That's how greatness arrives. We've built a culture that glorifies overnight results and demonizes the grind. And that illusion is lethal. It convinces men to abandon what matters most the moment they hit friction. But friction is not the enemy. It's the process revealing itself. Those first 12 months of struggle where you're clumsy, slow, embarrassed, uncertain, that is sacred ground. That is the universe asking you, do you want this badly enough to be bad at it first? The ones who say yes without flinching, they are the future greats. Not because of talent, but because of tolerance. Every craft has a gate, and the gate is guarded by boredom, repetition, tedium. Everyone loves the result, few survive the process. The difference? Endurance. Not just of time, but of faith. Faith that the boring stuff is working. That the muscle built today won't show up tomorrow, but it will show up. That the knowledge absorbed in year 1 will make sense in year 4. That the sacrifice made in private will echo in public, long after others have gone quiet. This is not mythology, it's mathematics. And the man who honors this law becomes unshakable. There's something poetic about watching someone commit to 10 years. Because most people won't. And the moment they realize you will, something shifts. You stop being seen as a dreamer. You become inevitable. Your name becomes heavier. Your presence becomes credible. Because you kept showing up. You became the man who didn't flinch when results didn't come. The man who knew that depth takes time and didn't argue with that truth. You didn't try to impress. You tried to endure. And in that, you became undeniable. 10 years is not a sentence, it's a sculptor. It doesn't just build skills. It removes illusion. It kills entitlement. It teaches you that mastery has no finish line. That every time you arrive, there's another level waiting. And instead of being discouraged, you become addicted to the journey. Because now you know that every hour spent in focus is an hour that carves you deeper into who you were born to become. And no one can take that from you. Not age, not doubt, not failure. It's yours, and it's waiting. Time moves differently when you're aligned. Not in the way a clock slows, but in how your soul begins to escape it. Hours stop dragging. Days lose their edge. Deadlines turn into mile markers instead of death sentences. You blink and 8 hours are gone, yet you feel like you've just begun. That's how you know you're close to your lane. The lane designed with your DNA in mind. Most people live like they're pulling their body through concrete. But when you've locked into your purpose, time turns into a companion instead of a cage. You stop fighting the clock. You start dancing with it. And when time respects your movement, you know you finally stop chasing the wrong thing. Work transforms. It's no longer labor. It's fuel. You don't dread Mondays. You resent rest days, not because you hate recovery, but because you're in love with the build. Work energizes you, not because it's easy, but because it's meaningful. Your tasks have weight now. They echo. They connect. Every small thing becomes a thread in the grand design you're weaving. You don't fantasize about escaping your effort. You crave increasing it. And the version of you that used to fantasize about weekends, he's gone. Buried by the man who shows up every day, not because he has to, but because he can't not. Money changes roles. It stops being the prize. It starts being the byproduct. You begin to see it for what it is, a mirror of value. Not value in theory, but value in execution. You don't chase money anymore. You chase skill, mastery, precision. And money follows you like a dog chasing a master. You don't beg for it. You don't need it to validate your path. You've built something so real, so necessary, that money has no choice but to show up. That's the twist no one talks about. When you stop needing the check, it starts writing itself. Learning no longer feels like study. It feels like revelation. You absorb knowledge like oxygen, not for grades, not for applause, but because it fills the space inside you that no distraction ever could. You wake up craving new ideas. You chase discomfort because it teaches you. Reading feels like decoding your future. Every insight hits like a prophecy. Every concept unlocks a new room in your mind. You don't need motivation to learn. You just need a question. And in that hunger, you start to see what school never showed you. Learning is what keeps the fire alive. Discipline becomes the default setting. You don't need tricks, apps, hacks, or accountability partners. You don't need motivation. You have identity. You've become the kind of man who doesn't negotiate with laziness. You don't look for loopholes. You look for pressure. Because pressure reveals the flaws in your process. And fixing those flaws feels better than indulgence ever could. Discipline isn't a sacrifice anymore. It's the path of least resistance. Because every time you don't show up, you lose more than progress. You lose access to the man you're becoming. And that's not a trade you're willing to make. You stop thinking in days. You start thinking in decades. Your vision expands. You aren't trying to fix next week. You're building a structure that will still stand in 30 years. Your metrics shift from speed to sustainability. You don't care how long it takes. You care whether it lasts. You start building things that will outlive your mood, your trend, your timeline. And when you play on that scale, your mind stabilizes. You stop measuring progress by what you've gained. You start measuring it by what you've survived, what you've endured, what you've outlasted. Waking up becomes sacred. You don't roll out of bed, you rise. You don't hit snooze, you hear purpose calling. The first breath of the day feels like a new opportunity to prove to yourself that you're not done, that you're not finished sculpting, that the vision hasn't left you, that this day is another brick in the cathedral of your life. Most people wake up to escape dreams. You wake up to build them, and that alone separates you from 99% of the world. You feel like you don't belong, but not in the way that hurts, in the way that clarifies. You walk into rooms and realize your priorities are foreign to them. Your hunger makes people uncomfortable. Your pace confuses them. Your solitude unsettles them. But you wouldn't change a thing. You've learned that being misunderstood is often the first sign of being on the right path, because the herd only applauds its own. And when you stop needing their applause, you become unstoppable. You begin to notice that everything in your life starts reflecting your shift. Your relationships upgrade. Your environment evolves. You clean your space, not because it's messy, but because clarity is sacred now. You refine your circle. You let go of dead conversations. You no longer chase connection. You attract alignment. Your whole world begins to orbit around the man you're becoming. And that's how you know you're no longer living out of memory. You're living out of vision. Pay attention to where you stop short. That's where the story always collapses. Not because you're incapable, but because you never stayed long enough to witness the rewrite. That invisible wall you always hit. It's not a dead end. It's a mirror, reflecting your old habits, your mental programming, your need for certainty. You think it's a sign to retreat, but it's the exact place you're meant to push through. The discomfort you feel, those thoughts screaming that you're not ready, not worthy, not meant for this. That is the test, not of your potential, but of your commitment. And 99 out of 100 people retreat at that threshold. They call it balance. They call it self-care. but what they're really doing is self-preserving an identity they were meant to destroy. You have to train your nervous system to stand still in the storm of doubt, because the thoughts that try to break you are not permanent. They're echoes of your former life, of the version of you that never finished, that always circled back to comfort. But if you learn to recognize the voice and not obey it, you win. You stop reacting to fear and start studying it. You turn it into fuel. You transmute panic into clarity. That moment where you would normally walk away becomes sacred ground, not because it feels good, but because it burns, and only what burns can forge. Most people confuse the threshold with a sign to quit. They think if something hurts, it must be wrong. If the path feels hard, it must not be meant for them. But the pain you feel at the edge of your evolution is not punishment. It's permission. It's your old life, throwing one final tantrum before it dissolves. When your hands shake, when your breathing shortens, when every instinct tells you to run, that's the moment your future is watching. And it's not looking for perfection. It's looking for courage, the kind that moves forward anyway. The discomfort you run from is your custom-designed gym. It's not there to torment you. It's there to strengthen you. That anxiety that floods in when you try something new. That's your brain rewriting its code. It panics because it doesn't recognize the terrain. But push through long enough, and the unfamiliar becomes home. The impossible becomes routine. And one day you'll look back at the place you used to stop and wonder how it ever had that much power over you. The wall was never real, only the story you gave it. Magic happens when you start to love the point where you used to quit. When you crave the friction instead of fleeing it. When that internal alarm, the one that screams too far, too fast, too much, becomes a welcome noise. Not because you're reckless, but because you've learned that transformation has a soundtrack. And that sound is chaos, resistance, discomfort. Only those who stay through the noise reach the silence that follows. And that silence, that's the sound of breakthrough. That's the sound of a new identity settling in. The world is built by those who didn't walk away when the voice inside begged them to. Every artist, every builder, every legend has met that wall. And they did the unthinkable. They stayed. They wrote through the self-doubt. They trained through the fatigue. They kept creating when no one was watching. That's what separates the few who make it from the many who almost did. The line isn't talent, it's tolerance. And that line shows up in the same place every time. The moment right before the miracle. You can track your evolution by where you flinch. Look at the moment you ghost your routine. The point in the workout where you ease up. The line in your journaling where you get vague. The conversation you avoid having. The task you keep postponing. These are not minor details. They are coordinates. They reveal where you've built an invisible cage. And each time you stop short, the bars thicken. But each time you push a little further, the door creaks open. And one day you step through. Not as a different person, but as the person you were before the fear taught you to shrink. That's why the edge matters. Because the edge is where the identity shifts. The edge is where the man who used to quit meets the man who finishes. They lock eyes, and only one walks forward. But that decision is made in seconds. You can't think your way through it. You act, you breathe, you override. And in that override, something ancient activates. Something primal. The will to grow. The desire to conquer yourself, not others. Because the true opponent has always been your limits. Once you start crossing that line, everything changes. Your confidence doesn't come from fake affirmations. It comes from evidence. The evidence that you did not quit where you used to, that you stayed, fought, finished. And that evidence builds a man who becomes terrifying to his former self. Because now, nothing inside him remains unconquered.